Hi, thanks for joining me today. I'm Gail Gross with Greetings from Gail. Today I'm going to take the Daisy Meadows card making workshop kit from close to my heart. This kit creates beautiful floral cards, but I'm just going to take the die that comes with the stamp set. That is this gate for an archway in a garden, and I'm going to create several cards that are unique to completely different than what is in the card kit itself. We will be doing things like learning inking techniques, creating your own stencil to create these cloud backgrounds, and designing a gatefold card. So I'm going to be listing in the section where you said see more at the bottom of the screen, and I will list the timestamps for each of those sections of the process so that you can jump around to those things and get the sections that you're interested in the most, or just maybe replay those sections after you've seen the whole thing. If you like what you see, I'd ask you to give it a thumbs up and subscribe so that you'll get notices of further videos in the future. Thanks for joining me today, and let's go create. What you're looking at here is the kit for the Daisy Meadows card making workshop. It provides everything that you need to create 16 cards. There are printed instructions that give you all of the information for these 4 cards and enough materials to make 4 of each card. I'll show you the stamp set in just a minute, but there's cutting diagrams, and then there's specific instructions for each card, including where to place things and different techniques. This kit is actually focusing on an inking technique, different ways to use your inks with this, and it's great. Here is the stamp set that is included with it. The stamp set has not only the stamps, but the thin cut dies. And you're going to notice that on one of the cards that there are a bunch of little tiny roses, and luckily we have 4 of those dies to cut those little tiny roses out with. In addition, you have all of the papers that you need to create these projects. You have the pattern paper, which is double-sided. You have 4 sheets of cardstock of different colors, and that is what you will be using when you follow those cutting directions. In addition, you have 16 card bases that are already pre-scored, and you have 16 envelopes, and the embellishment for this kit is a set of wooden hearts. So let's take a look at a couple of the cards so that you can see how they are being used. We're going to take a look at these 2 right here that are showing, this one and that's colored. So here's the first one, using a lot of those small flowers and stamped across the bottom. It has the sponging technique behind the sentiment, and here are those wooden hearts. So they've just been used glue dots or liquid glue on the back of them to adhere them down, and they stick. In addition to the sponging here, there's second generation stamping, and they tell you how to do that by inking up your stamp, stamping it on a piece of scratch paper, and then stamping it a second time, and you get a lighter image. Here is that archway card. Now what I want you to know on this one, that there's a lot of inking done because the archway started off white. So I used the smoothie ink as I used on the other card, inked it up, and then adhered it down. There are those small roses that you saw. And again, this is one of those wooden hearts, but this time it's been inked with that same smoothie ink. And I actually added a little bit of shimmer brush to it as well, so that it had a little bit of shine. They're very, very flexible and lots of fun to work with. Well, now that you see what's in the kit, we can take those same elements, particularly that stamp and die, and create unmeasurable number of projects, and I'm going to show you a couple today that are really fun. The first card that I'm going to be working on today is this fun gateway arched garden scene with the fence added on to the gateway arch. But you'll notice that there's quite a bit of background design going on there, and that is all going to be created with inks and ink applicators. So I'm going to talk about the options you have for adding that ink to your paper, and then I'm going to do a very simple one to recreate this card, but I'm going to use the cloud background on a second card that's coming up in just a little bit. So we first of all will be using two inks. I'm going to be using Glacier Blue, which has been well used, you can see, and Green Apple. Then there's three different ways that I like to use to apply the ink. One is to use the Tim Holtz mini ink applicators, and this is the one that I used to sponge this gateway when I was experimenting for the previous card that I showed you. Then there's also blending brushes, which are great, and I'm going to use them when I create the cloud background on the next card that we do. But the simplest and honestly the most economical method is just simply to use a sponge. What you can see that I've done here is I just have a portion of a sponge. Close to my heart has this full circle sponge, which I like to cut. This one's already been cut in half, and now I'm going to cut this into thirds. So I'm going to take a third of it there, and I'm just going to save the rest of this for later because I don't know exactly what I'm going to use it for, so I'll set it aside. Now, because on this one you can see that I have a piece of cardstock that tells me the name of the color. That's because I have coordinating cardstock for these. But if you don't have coordinating cardstock, you could simply take your sponge and your ink and ink up an extra piece of cardstock and make it the same color that it's going to be when you ink it on your project. So here's my green apple coloring. I'll just fold it in half, and what I've done with these is literally taken my stapler and just come in, stapled it, and now I have a handle so that my fingers don't have to get as inky, and I can easily use this over and over again. In fact, I have a whole bucket full of sponges of different colors, but because they're labeled, I don't have to wash them each time. And I can have just as many as I need for the various colors that I'm going to use. So let's see how we're going to get started by doing a blue and a green background on this card. So to start with, I've got my pre-scored card base. Close to my heart sells these in a value pack of 50 in the pack with the envelopes. To make sure that it stays closed, I am just using my bone folder against it. Now, the blue is a lighter color, so I'm going to start with the blue at the top, and I need to get an idea about how far down my arch is going to go. And so I've got my colored arch right here so I can get an idea, and I also need to see what my sentiment is going to be and how far down that's going to go. So I've got that on my block, which I'll stamp later, and I can see that it's going to fit right down in this corner, and I want my archway to just be above that. So now I have an idea about where I want my green to start and my blue to stop. But because the blue is lighter, I can easily overlap it. So I am going to just make a little mark off here on the side with my paper piercer since I don't have anything else. So I know that's kind of where I want my blue to stop and my green's going to get started. So I'm going to open up my Glacier, that's my blue that I'm using, and I'm just going to get a lot of ink on that. And with the sponge, it's got a little bit more air holes in it than, say, the blending brush does, or even the Tim Holtz sponge. That's more solid. The advantage of this, particularly for doing the sky, is that I can get a little bit more of a looser coloring and feel with it. I like to start off the edge of the paper. You'll notice that I've got another sheet of paper underneath it. There are many options of what you can use underneath this, and I'll be using a different option when I do the second card. But here we go. I'm just working this around, and you'll notice that some sections of it are much lighter than others, and it almost gives the effect of clouds without having to use a cloud stencil. So I somewhat misplaced how it's going, and so I'm just going to come back down with this, and I think I'm in good shape. So I can just see that I've got some opening spots here that will make it look somewhat like the clouds that are in this stenciled one. And if there's sections that I want to have a little bit darker, I can just come in and add a little bit more ink just to those. But you may have noticed that I'm always starting off the paper. It is making a darker line around the edge, but that's okay. It just kind of defines that space. Now I am going to get out my green with the new sponge that I just put together, and I'm going to ink that. And again, starting down here, starting at the bottom, and I'm adding the ink and holding my paper down. Now you'll notice again that it is looking somewhat light, but this is my grass, so I really want my grass to be a little bit darker. So I am going to just come in and ink over it again, which is nice because you can just ink this and add as much ink as you want, or you can just do it very lightly and decide if that's how you want it to be. I'm checking on my sentiment again, and I'm in good shape right there. So I'm just going to darken this section just a little bit more. And I think that is good. Toss my sponges back into my bin, and I am ready to proceed with the rest of this card. We are ready to start some stamping on the card base itself. You'll notice that in the stamp set there are these little pieces for grass, and I want to add some of that dimension. Even though it's going to be back behind the archway, I still want that to be on the base of the card as well as on the cut out archway and fence sections of them as well. So before I get started with that though, I do want to put down my sentiment so that I know where I'm working and I don't put too much of the grass right where I want my sentiment to be. So I'm going to put my foam from my stamp set underneath here so that I've got a nice base for stamping. I have used this set before, but I always like to check it to make sure that it's stamping well. There we go. So now this greeting is going to go right down here in the corner, and it's a nice impression. I'll stamp it off, and I will use my stamp chamois to clean my stamp, and that's done. I'll set the black aside, but now I'm ready to start working on all of that grass that I've mentioned to you. So knowing that my archway is going to be up here, I need the grass to be coming along this and behind there, because you will see it. You can see it back through the arch there. You can see through the slats of the fence that you can see the green grass. So I'm going to kind of give a baseline here to start with, and then I'm just going to kind of build around that. Now I may just go ahead and speed this process up a little bit so that you don't have to see every single bit of it, but you'll also see me stamping on the base of the gateway and the fence. Okay, all of that grass is now stamped, and you can see that I'll have some space back behind there where it will still be showing through. And that's just exactly the way I want it to be. Now you might have noticed that I had a couple of extra pieces that I was putting the grass on, and you'll see that those are used on the sides of the archway. What I did was I just actually cut from this point down and got an extra set of the gate and then put it on the back side of each of these so that I could extend the fence and give it that whole scene instead of just having the single archway standing alone like this one is in the middle of the card. So I just thought it was fun to create more of a scene for the card here. So now what we want to do is we want to start creating that fence and the archway. And what I've done is that in order to give some dimension to this, because this is very narrow, it would be kind of tough to keep putting little pieces of foam all around it. So instead, I've cut out 3 different layers of the same archway. This is going to be our top layer, so I'm going to save that till the very end. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start gluing them together. And I'm going to grab a piece of colored paper so that you can actually see what it is that I'm doing. It is so much easier to see the white fence when it's against a darker colored background instead of on the white. So this is what I've done. This is this extra piece from the gate, but I am going to add it to the opposite side so that it matches up here and will extend the whole archway look. So I'm just going to add the glue to this post part of it. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so you can see better what it is that I'm doing here. So this glue provides me with a thinner application of the glue, and I'm just going to pick up my top layer and put it right over the top of it and push that down so that it sticks. Now I'm going to take the same on the other side, put my glue on it. You can see it's a clear glue, and I'm getting up too close so you can't see it. But anyway, I'll just stick that down on this side as well. And I will let those come together, and it matches up perfectly the way I want it to be. Something that helps when you're using glue is to put a little bit of weight on it for just a minute and let that sit so that you make sure that it dries flat and doesn't pop up. Something I'll talk to you about while that is happening is that I actually left this gate kind of open on this card. I put a little bit of foam underneath it so that it would be popped up, but it actually could move if somebody wanted to look inside the garden, so to speak. So that's a fun thing to do. But adding layers of the die cut works really well instead of necessarily just adding foam to everything each time. I'm ready to take my second layer, okay? And I am going to making sure that this does not have the stamping on it. And now I'm going to cover the entire archway. Get that done first. And then each of the pickets on the fence. I don't really need to do the cross lines on it because this is going to provide enough coverage that it will be fine. I found that it's easier to come back and do the little dots at the top of the fence posts after I have all the rest of it down. So now I'm ready to come back in and hold this down and work around and get it to match up. And this is really important. The very first one that I did, I really got them off kilter. I'm going to need to move this one just a little bit so I can kind of squeeze it together. And I'm going to put my little weight on there. So that is down there now. And I'm just going to speed up the video so that you can see me put the last layer with the grass on top of this. Okay, so this has been sitting for a bit, and while I was off camera, I decided I wanted to fill in that empty space between those rows of grass. So I stamped a few more, just so that I wouldn't see any empty spots if I was able to look through the fence. So let's go ahead and take the cover off of our fence and gateway arch, and now I've got a very stable archway and gate that I'm going to be able to apply to the front of my card. But what I have noticed is that as I work with this, it likes to separate. So I want a way to keep it in place. And that trick is going to be by using a Post-it note. So I only need a portion of the Post-it note. I need the sticky part. So I'm just going to cut off this section, and I can use it for a note later on, and grab the sticky part here and take it and make sure that my gate opening is even between those. I don't want it separated. I want it to be an even opening there. In order to make sure it stays that way, I'm just going to put the sticky note across it. Now I can pick this up and work with it. I can apply glue to the back side of this so that I can put it down onto the front of my card. Okay? This would be the time for you to take a look and see, is there anything else that you want to do on this background? Is there anything else that you want to add in there to make it look the way you want it to look? So once you get the archway down, it's kind of tough to make some changes. So I am ready to do this. I am once again going to leave the inside gate with no glue at all. I'm just going to glue the other parts, and that will be there. The flowers will somewhat keep it down in place, but it will give that opportunity if I wanted to sneak something back behind there that I could. Okay, so I'm just going to go back, and I'm going to continue to use this piece to glue on, and I am going to once again get this Tombow mono glue. I'm going to start with each of my little pickets and get them going. I'm going to do the entire arch, but I am not going to put any glue on the center ones here. Back to the picket fence on the side, and I've gone all the way up onto the little finials, the tops of those. So now I'm going to take my card and I'm ready to place this down, and I'm going to center it because I know with my picket fences they're just barely going to hang off the edge. I'm going to push it up just a smidge, and I'm going to set it down like this, and once again I'm going to put my weight on it. That's just a big stamp block, and I'm going to let it set. And while that sets off to the side, we're going to talk about the flowers that are going to go on here. These flowers are from a Daisy Meadows stamp set, but not the same one that has the workshop kit. This is the scrapbooking Daisy Meadows stamp set with these great flowers, and this is the set that I'm going to, this little bunch of flowers in the garden that I'm going to use, and it does come complete with dies. So I am one that likes to die cut first and then stamp. Now, I know a lot of people do it the other way, but I like to die cut. Then I put it on a dark background. The reason for this is that it allows me to see the outline of the die when I come over it with my stamp itself. That's the beauty of the clear stamps, is that you can see right through them. But sometimes if I were to put this on this light gray background, it would be harder for me to see the outline of it. So putting it on just a scrap piece of cardstock like this works great. I am using intense black ink. That is because I use alcohol markers to color. So I'm just stamping away here, getting it inked up really well, and then I am fitting it over the top of the die, stamping down and applying pressure. I like to let it sit there for a minute to let all that ink come off, and there it is. Now, I did not put the piece of foam underneath as I did when I was stamping the last time. So we're in luck that I already had another one pre-stamped. And in fact, I even have it pre-colored so that we don't have to stop and spend time to color the flowers as we have right here. So I actually discovered that my my colored flowers were right behind my stamped ones. They just stuck together because they're the exact same size. So now that I've got my card front is all dried and ready to work with, then I can remove my Post-it note from here, and I can decide where it is that I want to put my flowers. Now, if you wanted to, this would be a time when you could come in and add some foam underneath there, or you could just kind of move it in such a way so that it will be open if you want it to be. What I did on my card was I glued it down to the bottom and left it free at the top, just to give it a little bit of dimension. But I think on this one, I'm going to go ahead and add a strip of foam tape underneath. I keep them in this washi tape dispenser, which is great. So I'm just going to put a little bit of the foam tape, and I got just a smidge too much. So I'll cut that off, save it for later, and get that foam down and put it right over the top here, and my card is done. The next card that we're going to make is using the same basic design as far as the gateway arch and the fence next to it, but it's actually going to open. This is a gatefold card, and so we've got a gate on a gatefold card, which I think is kind of fun. But this time, we did the plain background on the last card, so we're going to put that stenciled cloud design on this one. So we're going to talk about that to begin with. The way that I created my stencil was I used this set of dies. You see this fancy border die set is what this is, and it has 5 different designs. But this scalloped edge is great as just that, a scalloped edge, but it also makes a great cloud design, and that's what I've used. But I tried different ways of creating it with materials that I had on hand. I have made stencils that have just been used for a few times, and I did them out of just cardstock. That works, but it does start to get kind of ratty at the edges after a bit of time, so that is not a really long-term solution. I wanted something a little lightweight, so I tried vellum, but you can see here that it started to bend on me because it doesn't have a great deal of weight with it. So it did work, but it wasn't my final choice. Another one is simply taking a piece of acetate. This could be packing material that you have left over from something that you recently bought. And you've got this big piece of plastic, and you can cut it down to the size you need. I've got mine 6 inches wide. The depth is whatever you want it to be. But I use that die to cut it out. And this works. It is a little bit thicker. But I thought, we have stencil film. So why not just use the stencil film to create my die, my stencil, using the die to cut the edges. So that's what I did. And so it's a little bit thinner, but the nice thing about it is that you can still see through it, which is one of the disadvantages of using the cardstock. Because if you're working with a design and you're trying to center things, such as I've got a lower level of clouds, an upper level of clouds, then I came in and did my center layer of clouds. I wanted to be able to see where this bottom layer was as I was working with that. So the stencil film is a great way to go with this. So that's what we're going to be using. Let me get us set up. A gatefold card opens in the center. So that means that it has to be folded on both ends of the card instead of the typical being folded in the middle of the card. We do not sell a card base like that, but it's very easy to create just using regular cardstock. So let's take a look at that. We are going to start with a piece of cardstock that is 5.5 inches tall, 8.5 inches long. So we need to score this, and I'm going to bring this down just a little bit so that you can see it closer up. I am going to score this at 2 1/8, okay? Now I could calculate and subtract 2 1/8 from 8 1/2, but the easier way for me is simply to rotate this piece of paper and score at this end at also 2 1/8. So now I've got my 2 score lines. Had I done the calculations, I would have come up with 6 3/8 inches for that second score line. But for me to just keep one number in my head is so much easier. So that's what I've done. So now I've got this, and I'm going to fold it on those score lines. And you can see that it is now meeting in the center. So I want to burnish the edges to make sure that this is going to stay closed. Speaking of staying closed, I'm going to be working with this and inking this. And I don't want it popping up all the time and getting ink on the inside of my card base. So there's something that I found as a trick to hold it together. I've got another set of Post-it notes. At one point, I would tell my classes that I should own stock in 3N because I use so many Post-it notes. So here's one piece. These are 3 by 3 Post-it notes. And because the card is 5 1/2 inches tall, I need to have 2 of these. So I've got my 2 strips, and what I'm going to do is apply this to the edge of one side of my card base, and they're going to overlap there. And then I'm going to bring the other side right up to it so that they meet. Sometimes they don't exactly hit in the center, so I want to be sure that I get everything inked the way it's supposed to be inked. So I'm just going to match this up here. And I am ready to start doing my inking. This will move and be flexible as I do the inking, so that's going to be fine. I'm going to go out a little bit, and I said I would use a different kind of a mat for the inking this time instead of just putting a piece of paper back behind. You can hear the ruckus over there. What I've got is the all-purpose mat from Close to My Heart. What I really like about this is that it is non-stick. So once I put this down on this side of the mat, it's not going to move. The other option I have is to flip it the other direction, and the mat's not going to move on my table, but my card base is going to move this way. So I'm going to flip it back over because I want my card base to stay put while I'm working on this. I mentioned to you that I'm going to be using the blending brushes on this project. And once again, we need to get an idea about where the archway is going to be laying on this so that I know how far down to come with my inking. Okay, the sentiment that I'm going to use is very small and narrow, so I'm not going to worry about that because I know it's going to fit. I'm going to stick with the same Happy Easter sentiment that's on this card. So I'm going to put that right down here. So I've got an idea that this is the area where my inking is going to be, that I want my blue to come down maybe about to this far, and then I'm going to put the green up to it, okay? Because remember, we're still going to have that fence going out around it. And I've got my stencil. So what I want to do is that I want to create, as I did in the previous card that we had, that I want to have some blue at the bottom here, and then my 3 layers of clouds up above there. So I'm going to start again with my Glacier ink, my well-used Glacier ink, and I am going to, this is what I was meaning on this, is that I've got my 3 layers of clouds, and at the bottom, I just want that to be a light blue. So I'm just going to come in here, and I'm going to ink the bottom of this, going from side to side. Now, you may notice, I'm going to have to move this down a little bit, but the Post-it note's going to come. I'm going to zoom in a bit so that you can see it a little bit better, and I can just move the whole mat up, which makes it nice. So once again, I'm just coming along the sides here and getting some of that blue down so I have an idea of where my ending point is. Now I'm going to come up to the top, and I'm going to start with my first set of clouds. I'm going to tip my stencil a bit, and ink up my brush and then come in and starting from the top, coming down on it. Now you'll notice that I'm overlapping a little bit. The paper is moving a little bit because it's a little bit wider than the half point. And that's okay. It's all going to lay flat and I can work with it this way. I can take a peek to see how it's doing, and I think that's great. So I'm going to move that off. And I'm going to come down here to the bottom, and I'm going to move my stencil so that I don't have the exact same pattern as I do up there, but I want, that's going to stick to it. So I'm going to kind of move it like this and tip it a little bit straighter, and again, come in and ink. Starting from the top section and coming down to the stencil. And you'll see in just a moment I'm going to take and rotate it and go into the center section here. So I'm going to go over here and tip it quite a bit to give a completely different dimension there. And if you overlap the previous blue, that's okay. You're just trying to get a design. Now, if you don't have a die like I did in order to cut this, you could easily just draw some arches and hand cut it from whatever medium you want to have your stencil cut out of. And I'm taking a look at this and I'm seeing I like the dimension that I've got there, but I need to come in down here below and get this to be just a little bit darker, because I don't want it just to look like it goes white to the green grass. So I'm going to come in and just fill in with some of that color. And the other thing that I need to take note of is that up above, when I've got my archway, can you see it with is there too much white so that my white archway is not noticeable? But I can see that I've got lots of definition. I made my blue very dark so that it's going to work. Okay, so now we're done with our glacier blue, and we're going to come in with that same green apple that we used before. And remembering that my archway is going to be here, I need to come up over the top of some of this blue in order to get my grass done. And again, my paper is staying where I put it. I don't have to worry about that. And I'm just inking away. And you can see that I'm getting a smoother coverage of the ink than I did when I used the sponge. It's a little bit more solid, but it's still a very soft feel with the whole thing. So there we go. I think that's going to be really good. And I'm going to do the same thing that I did the last time. And again, I'm just going to speed up the video on this so that you don't have to watch me stamp every little piece of the grass. But the first thing I want to do is show you the stamp that the Happy Easter sentiment is coming from. This is a set from last year's Easter celebration. It's called Happy Easter Bunny, and it is still available for purchase online. So I'll put a link to this information below. So I've got my little sentiment here, and I've got my black ink, and I've put my mat behind it. Remember, that was the reason why I didn't get a clean impression. I need a little bit of cushioning because the clear stamps do not have a cushion built into them, so I like to add that myself. So here we go. Put down the Happy Easter, and we got a good clean image this time. Once again, my nice stamp chamois cleans that up, and it's ready to be used another time. Okay, back to our grass, and I am going to leave this mat underneath as I stamp, and you'll watch me go fast speed as I do the grass. the grass is now complete. We have that down so that we are ready to go to the next stage, which is to assemble our fence and gate. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to assemble the first layer. Oh, and I forgot to stamp the top layer of this, which I will do just real quickly here so that we've got it. Because we definitely need to have some grass on the top of our piece. I'm going to use that colored cardstock again so that I can see it clearly. And I can just use one here and just stamp so that we see some grass over the top of the gate and also on the side fence pieces that we are using here as well. So make sure I get that going the right direction. There we go. Now we are going to put together, just as we did the last time, this first layer. That's the only thing that is the same about adhering these pieces for the gatefold card. I want a non-stamped gate, so I've got that there, and I need to have my two fence pieces and my glue. So I'm going to put the first two down here and get the archway matched up over the top of it. Okay, and I'm going to do the same on the other side. Okay, just going to let that sit for a moment. Now, as we go to put that onto the card front, we still have our Post-it notes back behind here keeping this together, and that is exactly what we need to do. The other thing that we need to do is, once again, while this is drying, I'm going to come and apply that same Post-it note that I saved from before. And I'm going to make sure that my opening is the way I want it to be, just very slender. And I am going to attach the Post-it note so that it stays that way as I work with it as I'm applying the glue to it. Okay? And I think we're good with this. It didn't take very long because there wasn't a lot of glue on that. So what we're going to do is, this is closed up with our Post-it notes behind it. And so we're going to get ready to apply this down onto the front of this card. And I'm noticing that I'm going to raise it up just a little bit higher because of the way my grass is. Okay, so I'm going to come back, and once again, I am going to glue the entire thing. I am going to glue all of these gate pieces down to the card because this part's already moving. I'm afraid it would be too fragile if we left those open. So I need to apply glue to every part of this trellis and the gate. Okay? When I was growing up, our neighbor had a white trellis in his yard, and there each spring there was a robin that would come and build her nest in there, and it was so fun to hear the birds and hear them singing. And my mom was actually able to climb up on a ladder and get some pictures with the movie camera of those baby birds, and that's a real special memory. So when I saw this archway with the gate on it, I just thought, oh, this is what happened in my neighbor's yard, and special memories of that. So I've got the glue down now on all of those pieces. I am going to grab my tweezers to help me with this. I'm going to grab it here, and I'm going to bring this down into the center. Bring it out just a little bit so you can see exactly what I'm doing. And I want to make sure that as I put this down, that the opening for the gateway, the gate opening there, lines up with the line that's going to open the card. Okay, so I'm working with that and turning it, and there it is. I'm going to just put this all down right here. Okay, and again, I'm going to put my weight down on top of it. Okay, while we let that set up, I'm going to talk about the other little images that are on here. I decided to turn this into an Easter card, and I had seen another consultant who had used this darling little bunny who is off of another stamp set that is, again, it's not in our current catalog, but it is still available. Okay, so I found the stamp set. I had it by the computer. So this is the set called Snuggle Up, and it has the stamp with that darling bunny and another cute little bunny and dies that go with it. So what I did, as before, I die cut the bunny, I stamped him, and then I used my Spectrum Noir Tri-Blend markers and colored him in. So he's all ready to go onto the front of the card. Now I needed these little tiny Easter eggs, and I found them in my stash. This set is from 10 years ago. It was a Stamp of the Month from Close to My Heart, the first full month that I was a consultant with Close to My Heart in 2011. So there's those 3 little tiny eggs. I used scrap paper in order to stamp them, and then I cut them all out. Just fussy cut around them, and it's quick and easy, so they're ready to go onto the front of the card as well. So now we are ready with our second layer. But before we do the second layer, this is what we have to do. We've got this down securely so we can remove that Post-it note. But what I need to do is I need to cut right here so that this card will open completely. You notice that it needs to open, but the arch is complete here, so we can't do that yet. So I'm going to take my scissors, and I'm just going to release from the Post-it note back there, pull that off, okay? And I'm going to come down and just cut right on the opening line. And there it is. Now I can move this off, and I've got my arch, gateway arch opening, okay? So there we've got this. So what I'm going to do now is just take and start working with the other layers and putting them on one at a time. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up. I'm going to apply adhesive only to the archway and the gate. I'm going to put the new one down and then trim it off. I'm going to speed this up so that you don't have to stop and wait for the pieces in between time. But we're going to, again, do 3 layers ending up with the one with the stamped grass on it. So let's go. Well, we are done. I have 3 layers of the arch and the gate here in the center of the card. You might have noticed that in the middle I decided to stamp a little bit more of the grass down here. I just felt like it was a little bit empty as I was putting the layers on. But now I've not done is cut the excess off the edges where the fence is overhanging. So I'm just going to come in with my scissors and trim that away, being careful not to cut into the fold line of my card. Just getting rid of that little bit of extra from that last picket of the fence. And there we go. Now I just need to add my little tiny eggs and my bunny. While we were waiting for those pieces to dry, I went ahead and put foam on the back of my bunny. So he is all ready to get popped up and sit at the fence and thinking of what wonderful things he'll be doing for Easter Sunday. For the little eggs, what I did was I used glue dots on the back of them. So I'm going to use a piercing tool that works really handy to pull the glue dots off of the carrier sheet, and then I can put that on the back of my egg like this, and hopefully it'll come right off of the piercing tool, and stick that next to, I put it on the wrong end of the egg. So we'll just take that off and grab another one. Okay, now I want it on the bottom of the egg. Here we go. Stick that down. And I'm going to do as I did before. I'm going to put the pink in the back, and I'm going to stick this little egg right over the top of it. And now I'll get another glue dot on the back bottom of the lagoon colored egg, and it's going to go right over the front of the other two. Okay, now I'm going to just put a little bit more, a few more glue dots on the back. Another thing I can do when I have a little bit bigger piece is I can literally just pick up the glue dots from the paper by pressing the cardstock right into them. So that's easy to do. And I'm going to grab another glue dot over here, and I'm ready to stick this down on the card front. And that's kind of where I've got my bunch of little grass right there, but I need to move it over so that it doesn't interfere with the opening of the card. So there's my eggs, and my card gatefold is opening with the gate intact. I hope that you've had fun with these two cards that we've created today, using the materials from the Daisy Meadows card making workshop, but using them in a completely different way. If you like what you've seen, please hit that subscribe button so that you'll get notices of future videos that I'll be doing. And I hope that you have a very enjoyable and sunny day.